Hello, I'm Jake Chambers. Oops, yeah. I'm the Scrutiny Officer.
Peter Nicholson, Hazelmere East Ward.
Brett Davidson, Councillor for Hindhead and Beacon Hill.
Terry Weldon, also Hazelmere East.
Derek Crow, Farncombe and Cadishall.
Andy McLeod, Moor Park and Farnham.
Lauren Atkins, Bramley and Warnash.
Zoe Burke, Lomax, Hazelmere East.
Michaela Wicks, Howland Heath End.
Thank you. Then we have some officers with us and one or two members of the executive. So Candice, do you want to start us off?
That's Candice Keat, Senior Accountant. Rosie Plaistow, Financial Services Manager.
Richard Bates, Section 151 Officer.
Susan Sale, Monitoring Officer.
Louisa Blundell, Housing Development Officer.
Abby Lewis, Executive Head of Regeneration and Planning Policy.
Councillor Liz Townsend, Executive Member for Planning and Economic Development.
Councillor Paul Follows, Leader of the Council.
Councillor Mark Merriweather, representing Farnham Moor Park and Executive Portfolio Holder for Finance Assets.
Jenny Sturgis, Policy and Performance Officer.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed. Firstly, then, let's go to the agenda and to agenda item 1, apologies for absence and substitutes. There are none. The minutes of the last meeting, these have been circulated. Can I first understand whether people believe these to be a true and accurate representation of the meeting? I would just add that Councillor Hyman was accidentally excluded from the exempt proceedings of our last meeting. That is to be added into the meetings, the minutes of the meeting, which will go online and be approved. But with that exception, are we happy to accept the minutes of the last meeting as true and accurate? We all agreed? Okay, fine. Items arising from that. The workforce profile working group that we've referred to has been established, and the first meeting of that is on Thursday of this week, on the 16th. And thank you to John Formby for his help in that. We've also established a housing scrutiny working group, which is underway. The scoping document has been reviewed, and that we will make further progress with. And thank you to Andrew Smith and others for help in setting that up. And then we have, I just thought it was worth noting, last time we went through 2 bids, one for Farnham, not Farnham, one for, it was for Farnham and for Godalming. I'm pleased to say that both of them were successful. So that is something to be very happy about, I think. Are there any other items from the minutes that anybody wants to raise? Okay, then let's move on to declarations of interests. Have we received any declarations of interest, Jane? Anybody want to make a declaration of interest now? Okay, fine, thank you. Item 4, questions from the members of the public. Have there been any received?
None have been received, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Agenda item 5, questions from members. Jake, have we received any?
I have not received any questions.
Okay, fine. Then we move on to item 6, which is the committee work programme. This is the document where we can look forward to the items that we may be able to have on future meetings. You can also see the meetings that we talked about last time or the time before. Many of those, of course, are on our meeting agenda this evening. There are a couple of points that I would make. In our next meeting, which is on the 15th of January, that will be almost entirely taken up with the budget. We may have time to squeeze a couple of things in apart from that, but that is a meeting which is really very important in our budget preparation, preparatory to the plans going to the executive and then on to full council. So there'll be little room for manoeuvre in our next meeting. One further thought or point that I would like to make is that we had a meeting of the Joint Governance Committee a few weeks ago. That's the Committee of Waverley and Guildford, which looks after the running of the collaboration. In that meeting, we did talk briefly about scrutiny and perhaps at some future point the need to have a scrutiny session, which we may do with our equivalent committee in Guildford. We thought that might be a good plan for us jointly to look at the joint collaboration. That's not something which is done and dusted. It is something to be further discussed. Just a test opinion, I don't want to get into a big debate, but would members of the committee welcome that as a good thought, or would members here say, oh, no way, that's not for me? Any thoughts on that? Do I get some nods on the head? That's broadly a good plan.
Good idea.
Okay, I felt it was in principle a good idea, but I thought that I would just test that with you. There is one further item from the last agenda, really, which is the first item on our work programme, which is that concerning 69 High Street, Godalming. You recall that at our last meeting, we took a vote as to whether we wanted to criticise and non-concur or disagree with the purchase of 69 High Street and the extra funding for the retail unit. That was defeated. The committee then expressed concerns regarding the acquisition and development of 69 High Street. And that was, the committee then expressed a desire for a full review to be undertaken, including lessons for the future. The leader questioned me about what that meant. Paul, I think that you probably want to speak about that now. Would you want to just talk to that? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I registered to speak on this and indeed every other item, just to add some clarification from the point of view of the executive. From my point of view, the executive went through the matter of 69 High Street in some depth multiple times. We all attended member briefings on the subject and we're all very clear of it. So the executive are very clear on why we took the decision, what the finances were, and in fact, all of the issues that ONS have been through. The reason that I deferred it back to ONS is because my personal belief is that post-decision scrutiny of financial matters is firmly the remit of ONS resources and therefore within your remit, Mr. Chairman, to set up a task and finish group to conduct the very activity that you've discussed. I see absolutely no value in the executive going through something that it has reviewed at least twice, if not more, and members have gone through several times themselves. And if ONS wish to conduct post-decision scrutiny, they have entirely that right in their remit, and I urge you to do so, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any thoughts from members of the committee on that?
I thought the objective of that was to look at lessons learned. So not to kind of pick holes, but for everyone to discuss that. So I don't know whether it would be correct for us to just do that as a team. Surely it would be better as something more collaboratively where everyone can learn those lessons.
Could I just, before you reply, Paul, if I may, I mean, we clearly discussed a feeling that the original purchase price of the building was too high. We questioned the quality of the advice that was given at the time. We questioned the cost of the additional expense or capital to be employed on the retail unit and the very long payback. We questioned the heads of terms with the tenant not being agreed at either the original purchase time or at the decision point to go with an extra £2 million. And we questioned the delays to housing start. There were other points made, but those were the sort of general points that were made. The feeling was that, that there ought to be some sort of, after a significant purchase, there ought to be at some point a recapitulation, a look at what's happened and say, did we get all those things right? I think that was the general feeling. The timing of that and who should do it was actually not discussed. But before you come back in, does any other member of the committee want to say anything? Mr. Weldon.
Mr. Chairman, I rather disagree. I think you using the word we questioned rather too loosely. It was some members questioned, not all of us as a group. And I think this whole issue has now been done over and over and over, and I think it's time to leave it. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very true. Yes, it wasn't a unanimous thing. And of course, the voting was, I think, well, the voting was 4 to 5 against a criticism, but it was a unanimous view of the committee that a review should be undertaken. So that was something which we all decided. Paul, do you want to come back?
So firstly, it was the unanimous review opinion of the executive that if such a review was to be undertaken, it should be undertaken by ONS. The executive, as I have said, have been through the details of this on multiple occasions. We disagreed with a number of the assertions made by certain members of this committee. Something that I will assert at other points during this session on the items of which I've registered to speak. The executive will only consider recommendations that have had an actual vote of this committee, so that it's very clear that the will of this committee is actually established rather than the will of particular members of this committee. In terms of the actual requirement to conduct some kind of lessons learned review, the executive believes that the remit of ONS resources is the most proper place to conduct such a review, and so therefore my advice would be that a task and finish group of ONS to conduct a lessons learned review would be the most appropriate, and I will not use further time of the executive and our officers to go over things that we have looked at least twice, if not more.
Okay, I understand that. Thank you. I will consider that further and put it on the agenda for next time when I've had an opportunity to consider that. I would just say, Leader, that if you look at the minutes of the meeting, with the 2 recommendations that were made to this committee, there was a vote. There was 5 members voted against the first motion and 4 members voted in favour of it. So it was a split point. And you, Ontario, of course, are entirely correct. It was not a complete unanimous view, but the members voted entirely in favour of this idea of some sort of review being undertaken. So that was a vote taken and was unanimous. So that's not a matter of.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, I don't disagree with the concept of a review. I only disagree with the concept of it being undertaken by the executive when the remit sits with you.
Thank you. I understand that. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to say, having run task and finish groups both here at Waverley and also at Surrey, I think a task and finish group would be the appropriate body to do it. In terms of Lauren's point, actually, in terms of the lessons to be learned, everybody should be involved. One of the things a task and finish group does is call evidence, actually, and actually can invite people to come along to the group to actually discuss it with them. So the task and finish group could invite officers or members of the executive to come to the group. So I think it would be the appropriate body to do it if such a exercise was necessary. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, well, what I will do is I'll take that away as homework and consider how best to push that forward in terms of what that group should be, how it should be put together, what its terms of reference should be, and take some advice on that. So I will come back to members of the committee. Are you happy for me to do that? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Any other points to be made on the committee work programme? Okay, then let's move. Sorry, Peter.
This is page 23, the Housing Scrutiny Review of Regulatory Standards. Sorry, is it on? Oh, thank you. Right, yes. Ought we to involve the Landlord Services Board on this? I mean, they are involved directly with tenants. They have their monthly meetings, and perhaps they might be able to add something or add quite a bit to the discussion.
That's something for the working group to consider, which I will ask them to do. But there's nothing to stop members of this committee going along to that. Yeah. Okay, thank you. With that, let's move on to item 7, if we may, and that's the corporate performance report. Jenny, do you want to introduce this?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There's nothing specific to highlight in this report. If the members would just like to look at the sections under their remit, which is from page 44 of the agenda to page 79, and any heads of service who are here will take any questions, and any heads of service who aren't here, I'm happy to take those questions away and request a written response. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. We are, of course, as Jenny says, only looking at the first set of pages, which takes us up to page 35, and we don't go beyond that. So I'm going to take each section as we go, if I may. If we can then start with page 4, and I'm using the page numbers of the report itself, which is in the bottom right-hand side, rather than the agenda papers, just to avoid confusion. So if we can talk in terms of of page 4 and onwards, have any members got any questions they want to raise or points that they want to make? In that case, maybe I can make a start and say, could I please have a comment on the number of complaints? I'm looking at the top of page 6. We have a steady upward turn, and the percentage responded to within the target time frame in Q1 on page 6 is not looking too good. Then I want to go and ask a question on staff turnover. Could we have a response on the complaints number first, please?
Chair Nicola Hames, who is the head of service for communication and customer services, is not here this evening. Details of the breakdown of that percentage can be found in each section. I think there was in particular 2 service areas which significantly contributed to those figures. One of them was housing services, which is the remit of this committee. The other one was environmental services, which is not the remit of this committee. So we can possibly see that under housing.
We can do it under housing if that would make sense. Okay.
Yeah, and there is an explanation under housing. In terms of staff turnover, the executive head for organizational development, Robin Taylor, is online with us, and I'm sure he'll be happy to answer any question with regards to staff turnover.
Thank you. Yes, my point on that was it continues at a very high level. I can see the comments on it. I note the difficulty with the recruitment of finance staff. We've talked about the difficulties of recruiting planning staff. I know that 1 or 2 other members have now left or have announced that they're leaving our planning department. So I just wondered whether we could have a comment on that. And I wonder whether, given the seriousness of our staff turnover position, whether we could have a more detailed breakdown in the future between the major departments. So maybe Robin could make a reply on that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So, I mean, the first thing to say is that on page 74, you get the benchmarking information to give you some, some comparison against that. So you'll see that although compared to our previous stats, we do have a higher figure, you'll also see that actually it compares, not that dissimilar to the modal average across Surrey, apologies. So it's not that different. In terms of digging into the detail, my suggestion is, as we've already got the workforce profile group, task and finish group set up, and that we're meeting on Thursday, that perhaps we could pick up that question of what further detail to dig into when we meet on Thursday, because that is the intention of that group, to get underneath the skin of these sorts of stats and consider what else the committee wants to look at.
Thank you. Yes, I think that's probably reasonable. Anybody else want to make a comment on that? Okay. Any other points that anybody wants to make, please?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of page 9, if I can refer to that, which is page 49, if that is one of the pages we're looking at, I just want to point out, I found some of the percentage figures a little bit curious and I think a bit misleading. If you take the one halfway down the page to do with joint management, we've got a sort of variance in expenditure of 1% and income 0, yet we finish up with an adverse of 449%. And that's rather a false figure, actually, because things are going quite well in that. It's just because we seem to be comparing the difference between the approved budget, which is 4, with the variance, forecast variance, which is 16, which should actually be 400%, by the way, not 449. It's just, you obviously look for high figures when you're looking at these variances, and you obviously 400, that seems terrible. And then when you look at the detail, it's not something to even worry about. So I'm not quite sure why we're producing these figures that make things look bad when something which isn't apparently bad. Just something that puzzled me.
This actually comes into agenda item 8 is when we look at the at the general fund review, so we may want to put off discussion further on that. But do you want to comment on that? I don't know, Robin or Richard, is there any comment on that particular point?
If I may, Chair. So yes, those percentages do look odd. They are a formula-driven percentage, so I can understand that the 16 on the 4 for the joint management team. The numbers are rounded in this table, so the actual figures would have delivered that 449%. But I understand the confusion that percentage creates, and perhaps we can review what percentages we're giving, because the total does look a little bizarre when you look at it in this reporting format.
I have some sympathy on both sides. I just mentioned lies, damn lies and statistics. And any other questions on that section? But I would mention that we have got item 8 in the general fund review coming up, which will cover a great deal of this. But Zoe?
No, it's just a quick thank you to Robin for the benchmarking. Much appreciated.
Jerome?
Can I take us to the service dashboard, or am I jumping ahead too quickly? Which is on.
I would appreciate if we could hang on to that until.
Will do.
Let's go section by section. Are there any other points to be made on this section before we go to the next? Lauren?
Thank you, Chair. Just one small point. I can see on page 8 of the report, it says that there was an underachievement of rental income due to an increase in void levels. And I just wondered why that was the case. Thank you.
No problem. So it's a mixture of some long-term voids that we're holding because of developments being delayed. But we have seen an increase in our voids on our properties. It's running at about 1.1% as compared to 1%. So it's quite a small percentage difference, but it is mainly due to long-term voids.
Okay, I've got some other points, but I'll bring them up in the section item, agenda item 8, when we're discussing this in more detail. Let's then move on, if we may, to page 12, the service dashboard, assets and property. Jerome, you wanted to make a point? Here is your time.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to comment possibly somewhat sort of with a local hat on. We have on the projects brought forward a fair number, all concerned with my local town, Hazelmere. A lesson which I think we should have recognized from the debacle around the Edge issue, the Edge Leisure Centre. For those who are not familiar with it, is that the town needs to be engaged actively right from the outset. And I can report that there has been no such engagement with the town council that I'm aware of. And that would be a very good thing before we proceed too much further down the advancement of these projects, which I fully support in principle. It's just that we need to have the assurance and the commitment of the town to ensure that we have a successful completion and without outrages, as we've experienced, I think, in Farnham in past projects there. So I would ask as a recommendation that we do encourage in projects which are investing in our towns to engage with the community as soon as is possible.
Okay, thank you. Who's best to answer that? Yeah, Paul?
So the town clerk of Hazelmere Town Council has been briefed on those projects, and I think it's probably worth asking her what the update is and why that's not got to members. So it's my understanding that she has been briefed explicitly to have that conversation with you. There are a number of issues that need to be briefed to borough councillors first before they're briefed to the town council, particularly when it comes to some of the projects. You'll understand that it would be completely improper for us to go and brief the town council, even though there is a significant overlap, as there is in many of the larger towns, of members. Councillor Rabini is attending executive briefing, I believe, in 2 weeks' time. He has proposed a number of questions that he would like raised on behalf of Hazelmere, at which point the executive will brief him on those, and he will be able to brief members at Hazelmere Town Council and here on those matters. When those projects are at a state that we can fully brief Waverley Borough Council members, which of course we need to do first before we go into any of the detail, we will obviously do that. And for things as large as potentially Fairground Car Park, for example, we will probably host all member briefings on those because they're relevant, I think, to the entire borough membership.
Jerome? No, personally, and I understand the difficulties which you raise, Leader, I would like to see earlier engagement with the town councillors in as much detail as is possible, mindful that it can, if necessary, have to be restricted.
Okay, I'm sure that will be taken on board. Could I ask a question on page 14 under facilities that mentions that the second floor, which I presume means the second floor of this building, is underway, being led by the assets team in terms of tenants moving in. Could I just inquire what the length of the tenure would be in this case, and where we are on any sort of reorganisation for this building?
You will note the release of papers to the Guildford Borough Council executive today. They are the same papers that will be in the public domain for the Waverley Borough Council executive. They specifically now do quantify in section 2.4 of its recommendations the first steps of the potential for co-location for the two boroughs. What I would argue, therefore, is that there is some scope for us to be hiring out some of the second floor of this building, but it can't be something that we can give particularly long leases to when there is a clear intent for co-location.
That was exactly what I was thinking too. So, okay, fine, that's fine. Thank you. Any other points that anybody wants to raise in this section? Okay, well, let's then move on to page 16, the service dashboard and communications and customer services. Any comments on that? Lauren, sorry. Sorry.
That's fine, that's fine.
You shouldn't sit next to one another.
I wanted to raise a question about CC1B. So the level of complaints that are responded to within times drastically changed. And I wanted to ask what's going on there.
Could I also ask a question on this? We spoke about complaints earlier, but I do note that in our last report 2 or 3 months ago, under this section, we did have a comment that we now have service complaints and administrators in place. We've increased resilience with 2 named contacts, and we are improving the system. And we continue to see the level of complaints rising or not going down. And I think it is something of great concern. I'm sure it's of great concern to the leader and the executive as well, but perhaps they'd like to further comment. Paul?
My comment would be that the stats relate to Q2 23-24, and there is a lag. So with the changes in staff that you yourself have just mentioned, I would expect the stats therefore to be impacted for the most current quarter and the following quarters. So it is not particularly surprising to see a continuation of an issue in Q2 when the actual issue has not been resolved from our side until Q3/Q4.
To be fair, I was quoting something from the report 3 months ago, which said we now have service complaints and so on and so forth. So it was stating what was the position 3 months ago.
These things do take time to actually get in. I mean, when we get a new member of staff, they have to be trained up, they have to get used to the systems. These things do take a little time to go through. We have also, I believe, had a fairly significant uptick in some of these issues raised. So it does take time to get these people on board.
I would just observe that I think as long as I've been a member of this committee, and we've pretty much had that as a reply, that it takes time and we've got something happening and it never seems to change. So again, I think it's a fair point for this committee to make, to say, we've heard it all before, is it going to change?
When somebody changes the system that local government operating in, I'm sure things will change, Mr. Chairman, but 15 years we've been dealing with this and I've only had to deal with it the last 6.
Oh, you had to get a political point in somewhere, didn't you? Right, okay. Zoe, do you want to come back on your point, or are you?
Just a very small point is that the number of complaints has actually come down from 76 to 67, but it's a minor point. I mean, the big picture is that the percentage of complaints responded to in time in 1 year has gone from 81% down to 49%. That's a big shift. That's all.
Yes, sorry, Jenny.
As I mentioned earlier, I think a fair number of these were impacted. The statistics were impacted from 2 services. I think when we get to housing services, there is further detail on their complaints.
Okay, thank you. Right, anything else in this section? Lauren.
Just one point coming back to what you said, Chair. I've seen as well, the staff turnover, sickness, complaints is a constant thing. So is there sort of a performance plan in place for example, the complaints team? Is there actually kind of a real plan in place to change that, please?
As I think was just alluded to, the actual specific issues relate into a particular department. So for me, it's not a performance plan of it being processed quickly by the staff that are handling complaints. It's about looking at the actual source of the complaints and looking at performance plan to address those. So quite a lot of the complaints, for example, relate to housing maintenance, and there are some issues there that I think need to be tackled. Landlord Services Board are dealing with some of those, and the executive are obviously picking up on those. I think my wider issue here is, in a situation where residents' expectations haven't really changed, and not unreasonably they haven't changed, and I'd have to look to Rosie perhaps to confirm the exact figures, but I think local government funding has reduced something like 70% over the last 10 years. So to see any change, you I think will naturally see an increase in complaints when expectations of a service haven't changed, but the funding of those services has massively dropped off. So from my point of view, we have to focus on the source of the complaints and address that, which, I mean, largely is things like housing maintenance, and it is things like refuse collection issues. Those are the issues we need to get to. This is not a case of the people who do the complaints processing not being quick enough or fast enough. It's looking at the issues that are being raised that is important to the exec.
Okay, well, we could initiate a considerable debate on that, and I don't want to do that, so I'm going to call a halt at that point, if I may. Let's move on then to page 19, which is the service dashboard for finance. Any comments? Whilst we're waiting, Chairman, might I just again, as I did, sorry, I said Chairman, I'm speaking to myself. Might I just say to Finance and the Treasury team, congratulations again on yet another good performance. If we look at page 22 and we see the forecast for annual interest receipts now at 3.39 million, it's up from 2.89 million last time. This looks to be a considerable salvation, so congratulations to them. I noted with some interest on page 20, the one reason for the fall off in some of the invoices being paid is a significant number of invoices for agency staff in planning being around, which is a very sad business about this is now being impacted in addition to the planning department itself having a large number of agency staff. However, any other points that anybody wants to make? Okay, then let's move swiftly on, if we may, to service dashboard housing on page 22. If you then look to page 25, that's where we get to some of the difficulties on complaints. Does anybody want to raise a point from that? If I may, then from the chair, I mean, I think if we look at page 65, in fact, H5A, H5B, H6A and H6B, if anything, they're getting a little better than they were last time. overall. It's sometimes difficult to read because in some cases higher is better, in other cases lower is better. So we have to be careful which way we read it. But there is some sign that the team is getting on top of that. Jenny, do you want to make a point or an observation on that? You've done that to death, I think you'll feel. Anybody else want to make a point on the housing side? We are looking at housing and the mid-year in item 9, so we can make other points then, I think, if we may. Let's then swiftly move on to there's the finance position and the housing services fund. Again, we've got item 9 in which the HRA mid-year review is up before us. So I think we can we don't need to look at that in any great detail. I would make the point that on page 29, on the first main table there, described as HRA core capital, that box is different to that which is in agenda item 9 on page 143, or maybe it's page 141. I can't read my writing, but we will pass swiftly on from that. Any other points on housing that anybody wants to raise, or are we content to leave that until we get to the agenda item 9? Okay, thank you. And then if we move on to page 30, which is the legal and democratic services section, any points that anybody wants to raise there? Jerry, you've been able to join us, so welcome. You've got a point to make?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, just very briefly on this on legal. On page 70, we see there, I think it's the third bullet point from the bottom, it says that we're exploring staff sharing opportunities with Guildford Borough Council as part of our collaboration plans. I note that in a later item it says that we're putting that off, so I just wondered whether we could discuss now in open or perhaps later in exempt. To what extent have we looked at it on the legal side? I understand this is wider than just what is being talked about, just the legal department that's being talked about in the later item. So this is covering a wider area of governance or whatever. But nevertheless, it says we're here that we're exploring them, that we were sort of in the in quarter 2, and we're now well into quarter 3. And I just wonder how far we'd got with that, if we've got any further on the legal side, because this seems to say the opposite to what was.
Okay, we've got the point, Jerry.
And then again, can I? Is page 76 also within this? Sorry, 36. There's a 40 pages difference, isn't there?
6 is in the next section, Jerry, so I have to hold on that.
Okay, thanks.
And would you like to make reply?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So we were starting conversations about shared services in legal between Guildford and Waverley, but of course we don't have a formal decision from the council at the moment to progress shared services. So whilst there have been preliminary conversations and work about that, nothing significant has progressed. Having said that, we do have authority for temporary staff sharing arrangements, and the council has delegated such authority to the chief executive. And we have looked at various options. We currently, Waverley has instructed Guildford lawyers just on a case-by-case basis for some legal work, and are providing support in 1 or 2 areas where we're under capacity, but nothing more formal than that at this stage.
Okay, thank you. Right, are there any other questions or points for legal and democratic services? Okay, let's move on then to page 32, which is organisational development. Anybody want to raise a point on that? I think I'd only raise the point that, again, there's an interesting comment at in paragraph 9.2.2 on finance staff being targeted fairly aggressively. So we are aware of the difficulties of recruitment and retention, and this is further evidence of some aggression by headhunters to take people from us. I don't know whether there's any comment that Richard might want to make generally on that. Richard, do you want to make any comment generally? I guess it's the same in Guildford as it is here.
I think it is an issue across the whole country now. I think the number of finance staff in local government is decreasing. And there are an awful lot of recruitment companies out there who are desperate to get hold of people. So there are literally, I mean, a dozen or so big players now who are chasing those few finance staff.
Maybe I should come out of retirement. Janet.
Just to confirm this, my son, who's an accountant, was headhunted by his own headhunter.
Thank you. With that, let's move on then to the regeneration and planning policy. This is page 35. This is the last item for us to consider. Does anybody want to make any point there?
If I may.
Jerry, yes, thank you.
Thanks. Yes, you'll appreciate it. Turning to page 36, it is or 76 of the bigger numbers, where it refers to the local plan. Am I in the right place? Yes. Planning policy and local plans. I've been somewhat disappointed to see that in the consideration so far of the local plan through the working group, the executive working group, that we haven't been addressing the constraints, in particular environmental constraints, as yet, because it's it should be one of the starting points. There was meant to be an all-member briefing last night, which was cancelled, as you probably know, in respect of compliance with environmental legislation and habitats legislation. You'll appreciate I was rather disappointed that's been brought forward, that was put back. And I wondered, could we be told whenabouts that we're likely to address the issue of habitats compliance? It's been an issue for 15 years, and of course with all the councils and PINs and other departments having defied the law, as the 2018 judgment confirmed for many years, it's important that we do get to this. So it having been put off, I'd like to know when's that likely to come forward to us for the all-member briefing, which we were intended to have, because of course it's something which we need to ensure that we are complying with on a day-to-day basis, and of course also when we're up in the courts and dealing with judges, as the Waverley was last week.
Jerry, I think you made your point. So shall I get a reply? Liz or Susan?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, Susan can
Okay.
add as well. But there's nothing about being put off. Obviously, in order to look at the habitats regulations, you need to go through and understand where the constraints across the borough, but also perhaps potentially where development might be going. So there is an order of reports and evidence. There's nothing to do with anything being put off whatsoever. So I'll pass on to Susan as well if she wants to make some other comments. Thank you, Chair.
Susan?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was just going to confirm that I think the meeting that Councillor Hyman's referring to is actually scheduled for next week on the 22nd. But if he wants to check in with Democratic Services staff in the morning, they can make sure he's got all of the details.
Okay, Jake, can you take a note and get back to Jerry, or can you say now?
Yes, my understanding, again, is from the top of my head, is that it was scheduled for the 22nd, but I'm happy to get back to Councillor Hyman after I've confirmed.
Okay,
the all-member briefing is on the 22nd, yes.
Jerry, Paul has just forwarded you an email concerning that, and it is on the 22nd, apparently.
That's an all-member briefing on the local plan. The one that was meant to be last night has been put off. It was cancelled or whatever. So are you saying that they're being merged into the same meeting? Is that the correct understanding?
Let me check with Liz. Liz?
No, that wasn't the same meeting. I think Councillor Hyman might be getting confused. I think we did have some kind of training session booked at one stage, but that wasn't possible to go ahead with that. But that was nothing to do with the all members briefing on the local plan.
Can I suggest, Jerry, that you have a word with Jake in the morning and ask Jake if he can follow up to bottom that out for you. Jake, is that okay? Okay, fine. Thank you. Anything else, Jerry?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just one point from me. On page 36, the penultimate, nearly the bottom paragraph, which is concerning the UK Shared Prosperity Fund and the launch of the Rural England Prosperity Fund. Could I just have a little more detail? Who can I speak to on that subject? I'm very interested in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so this is an initiative that's, as the update outlines, something that we've progressing in collaboration with Surrey County Council and other borough councils. So it's grant funding that's available to support projects in rural areas, there are a number of criteria that those projects need to hit. I can certainly circulate a link to councillors to then perhaps forward on to potential applicants to that. But there are outputs that need to be achieved, but it's a really good initiative, I think, and it follows on essentially from the former LEADER programme, which members may be aware of in terms of trying to support diversification and new employment.
Thank you. I'd appreciate it if you could put a link out to us. That would be very helpful. Maybe it's already been put out to all members and I haven't seen it, so I apologise for that. Was that what you're going to say?
I was going to say, yes, it has gone out previously. However, yes, it can be obviously circulated again. So we had £400,000 from the government for this particular fund, and we pooled it with other councils to make it more meaningful so that Surrey are administering the pool on behalf of the district and boroughs that have entered into that arrangement, and applications are currently being received on that.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd appreciate if you could send me the link anyway, that would be very helpful. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions, colleagues? In that case, I will bring that to a conclusion. Thank you very much indeed. We now move on to agenda item 8, which is the General Fund mid-year review. I think, Rosie, are you going to introduce this for us? Thank you very much indeed.
I will. Thank you, Chairman. So the report in front of you today is a mid-year MTFP review for the General Fund. It gives an update on our current year Q2 position that you've just been through, with a particular focus on the finances. It gives a quick reminder of the outturn position. So the outturn position for 22-23 was a underspend of 729,000 after allowing for agreed budget carry forwards. So there were some good news items in there around particularly our car park income performed better than anticipated. Our investment income also performed well. However, taking the hit around inflation to offset some of that. And we did have good management on our establishment last financial year. So that ended up in a final saving come year end. Regarding the 23-24 position, we at the end of Q2 are reporting a £234,000 surplus for year end position at the moment. There are a number of items in here. We are seeing that our inflation budget was insufficient. Inflation rates have been higher than we anticipated. However, that has seen again a benefit in the treasury yield for the council, which has more than mitigated the impact of the inflation. We've seen impacts on cost of living and the economic impact on the council. However, those have been controlled within budgets as it stands. And we are currently reporting in this financial year some shortfalls on our income in the areas of car parking, where unfortunately the recovery of car park usage following COVID-19 has begun to plateau, where we were anticipating it would continue to return. Our development management income regarding planning is falling short at the moment on budget, and also building control income has been falling short. So thankfully, the investment income is helping us to cover those shortfalls, and there are savings elsewhere as well in the council that are all helping to mitigate that, allowing us to report that current surplus of £234,000. Looking forward, we have updated our MTFP for the next few years in preparation for the budget setting process that we will be going through, or indeed the team have started already. So there are some areas that we have already refreshed. That includes our inflation rate assumptions, and we've built our assumptions in at 5% for the 24-25 budget year. And then we have also updated some of our income estimates in light of the current year's performance. Currently, the budget gap for the next financial year is sitting at £1.2 million, and officers will be working through that over the next few months to try and bring that back into balance ready for February council. So over the next few months, we'll be doing a lot of work with other services and members. We've also given here a capital programme review, and there are some reported savings and carry forwards in this report that officers wanted to raise with members. But overall, projects are going ahead. There are some inflationary impacts on capital projects that we're seeing, and we are seeing, due to the impact of the increased interest rates, that financial feasibilities for some of our capital projects are becoming more difficult, as the benefits of holding cash in our investment accounts is more beneficial at the moment with the increased interest rates. Other than that, I wasn't planning to go into too much detail. I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you. Who wants to kick off with any questions or comments? Andrew?
Thank you for your overview. You made a reference to car parking had obviously had a good outturn. However, you're still missing the budget. As you look forward for the next few years, are you anticipating car usage and therefore car parking income to plateau, decline, as we try and go more electric, cycling, walking?
Currently, what we are seeing is that following COVID-19, where we saw usage drop off heavily, that a lot of people are coming back and willing to pay the increased car parking fees that we are charging, which were agreed November 21, thank you. However, what we're seeing is behaviours have changed. People are not necessarily going into the office, not necessarily parking. We don't see that behaviour on the whole changing a great deal from this point onwards. So where we had anticipated it coming back to the original usage rates from pre-COVID-19, we now anticipate that the new norm is here, and that increase in usage is probably unlikely to happen going forward.
So you built that into the budgets for the next few years, have you?
We had to. We've now reversed some of that anticipated improvement. So with this MTFP has some improvement still, but less so than we had previously forecasting.
While we're on the subject of car parking, can I just ask a question? I am a little confused. On page 106, and you mentioned that car parking income will not hit the budget and is potentially 280,000 short. If we go to page 119, which is the spreadsheet, this is where life gets confusing with the way we report these things, because we're talking in 2023, 2024, the second column, we go down to car parking fees and charges on the first part of the table there. There's a figure which says minus 255. That's down, that's the change from last year. So if I read it correctly, that minus 255 should have an extra 280 on it. Is that right? And because minus is goodness, and we're 280 short. So are you saying that figure should be 485, whatever the figure should be?
Unfortunately, the figures reported are different figures. So the 255 that is in the 2023-24 column in the MTFP Annex 3 is the change from the 2022-23 budget. So that 255 is now part of our base budget in 23-24.
That's net of the 280 then, which because you were expecting another 280. Is that what you're saying? So that figure should be 280 greater than that, because you've now got a shortfall of 280, you're saying. So that figure should really read 535.
If I can clarify. So the 255 is what was built into budget. So we're not achieving that 255 plus another, I should know that quickly because I'm an accountant, 15 is it, to get us up to 280. So the 280 is the total underachievement against budget. So one, we're looking at budget on 255. The other is a forecast variance. So if we had a budget of a million and we've then put it up to 1,255,000, we're not achieving that one by 280,000.
Yeah, this gets back to my traditional difficulty here. I would love to see the 2023-24 gross figure in the budget and then see the variance against it, rather than seeing a series of variances against last year. And I never even saw the actuals compared with the budget for last year properly in gross format, only in a series of variances. This is where I get a real hang up with the way that we report. I think it's very
Yeah.
So, Candice, this is a traditional gripe of mine. Mark, maybe you could take this up at some point to make it more comprehensible.
Yeah, I mean, it's that there are, at the risk of repeating myself, there are certain conventions in local authority financial reporting that I'm not a huge fan of, and I'm going to be chairing a discussion at my own institute's public sector conference in a few weeks' time to discuss them. The broader point is that this is about communicating financial information about things that are going on in the real world. And we are seeing a change in the habits of our residents in using the car parks. The pricing is relatively inelastic for some of our car parks, and we are pricing them on an individual basis. So we are adjusting the prices as we see the demand change. One of the things that is there, and it's that this is sort of looking ahead, is that as the high street economy moves from daytime to evening, we may have to take a more forensic look into how we charge throughout the 24-hour period and through the weekends as well, because people at the moment can park in our car parks after 6 o'clock for free. So there are things that we are going to have to look at as part of our budgeting process, and that's something that's already been started.
Okay, I won't dwell on that further. We could have a long debate about that. Any other points that anybody wants to raise?
Well, sorry, Chair. I mean, you have to take these things in context. You know, we live in a world where we are very, very tightly constrained as to the funds that we can raise and our powers to spend them. And we are not the first administration here that has to deal with the fact that car parking income is an essential part of our independent revenue, and one of the very few things that are that can generate sufficient sums, despite the fact that we're restricted on what we can use the money for.
It's a very important chunk of our income. I agree. Jerome, you want to make a point?
On the subject of car parking income, a friend of mine whose daughter reckons it is much more economic to pay the fine, because the probability of her being picked up is relatively low. And I was wondering, is there a constraint on how much the council can fine offenders, so that as car parking prices rise, can we raise appropriately the charge for not paying your parking fees?
Mark?
The constraint is the cost of the enforcement.
But if we catch them every sort of 6th or 7th or 8th, can we raise the actual fine so that it's going to be?
We can discuss marginal utility until the cows come home, and criminal behaviour, if you like. You know, the point is that most of our residents you know, respect the fact that we have to charge for our car parks and behave appropriately.
Okay, thank you. Paul, you wanted to make a point?
Yeah, just to add, there are a number of areas where certainly I have expressed the desire to rapidly increase the fines that we charge for various things, particularly various types of antisocial behaviour. For example, at Frensham, where people were leaving barbecues, I wanted to increase the fines to a level that was, you know, it's £100 spot fine. I wanted to put in a fine structure that was absolutely punitive, frankly, for that kind of behaviour. These things are set by statute. We can't do it. The government have a plan to review it at some point, maybe when they get around to it. I have an unanswered letter to the appropriate minister asking when that review is actually going to happen. I have had no reply. So from my point of view, there is a will within the council to increase fines on areas where there are serious issues, both from a revenue perspective and also from a modification of behaviour perspective. But these are things that we aren't able to set. They sit with the government are doing nothing about it.
Okay, thank you. Could I ask a question on page 117, please? This is Annex 2, and that's the inflation position statement. The table 1 is the inflation levels included in the medium-term financial plan base, and table 2 is the updated position. I was just interested in the contracts and the waste, including house number increases. That's the biggest movement in that inflation position. Of the 168 total movement, 92 is included within the waste contract area. What's the position there, please? And it mentions house number increases, but presumably if new houses are built, we get an increase in the waste collection, but there's an increase in the collection of council tax, which would more than offset that. So I'm just interested into the arithmetic then. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, you're correct. It does include house number increases, and there is an increase in the council tax collection as well. Those properties are paying and billed for their council tax too. That just falls under the line when we present our budget papers through council tax base increases. So it is a presentational thing of local government, I'm afraid, rather than that those properties are not being charged for their council tax.
Fine. So the offset is greater than the problem we've got there, which is one. And the other question is in terms of the changed assumptions for next year. We seem to have quite a substantial pay increase assumption going in that. Is that linked to the change of the inflation rate that you put in, going from 4 to 5? Of course, you've had to put a higher inflation level in for this year. I wonder, in fact, whether I'll get, in the end, a lower inflation level next year. But that's, of course, a question of debate, isn't it?
Yeah, I couldn't possibly comment on what the pay increase assumption actuals will be for the future year. But yes, we have increased our assumption on pay increase alongside all the contracts. We've applied the same assumptions across the board.
Andy.
Thanks, Chairman. Can I just ask a general question, if I may, that the purpose of the council ultimately is to provide services to our residents, yeah? But we've also got this responsibility to balance the budget. And the impact on the budget cuts and the pressures we're under probably have a bigger effect on the more vulnerable members of society, the more deprived areas. Do we do impact assessments on the effect of these budget cuts and trying to arrange things so that there's less effect on the more vulnerable, worse off people, as opposed to the worrying too much about the car drivers who can probably afford to pay for increases in the car park? It's just a general question. Do we do that sort of thing? Yeah.
If I may, yes. So when services, heads of service, budget managers are proposing changes to how we deliver our services, they would all undertake an equality impact assessment, I think they call it, amongst other assessments to make sure that no particular vulnerable area of society were unfairly impacted. So those pieces of work are done by services.
So if I may, I'd just add follow-up question. Do you think that's understood amongst the population in general, outside the council, that actually happens? Now, I'm sure it does happen, but is it understood it actually does happen?
Sorry, can I ask, so when you ask, do people understand, is that members of the public? Oh,
Paul, to respond on that.
Just a couple of things on this. I mean, were it within my power, the first thing I'd ask Rosie to do is create about 15 more tax bands so that she could actually institute a progressive regime of tax so that we could actually bring in money without hurting people.
Paul,
who
let's
are
not
most
get into
vulnerable.
you're getting a
However,
political point
no,
again.
one thing I just wanted to just comment on from this morning we were discussing, we think that it's probably about time to do a participatory budget engagement exercise with the general public, just to get a feeling from them about some of the pressures on council tax. So that's something that we've discussed this morning, and we're probably going to kick off. We've got some slightly better tools coming in the comms team that will allow us to do a slightly more thorough job of that than we've been able to do with traditional tools in the past. But without giving the finance team additional tools to create new bands or to go above a cap of 2.99, there's very little we can actually do, Peter.
Fine, you do manage to put your political points in somehow or other. Okay.
That's why I registered to speak, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, I know, and I probably my job as the chairman to stop you doing it. The one further point on an entirely different, well, it's slightly the same actually. It's on page 109 in paragraph 8.2, the last bullet point. This is on organisational developments, but it talks about EV charging points. On the subject of EV charging points, just where are we with the rollout of those? What is the level of charging? Do we make money out of the EV charging? And what is the position as far as the car parking element of that? Is there a car parking element when the EV point is in the car park? I just wonder where we are with the EV rollout and how it impacts on our parking revenue.
So I can certainly answer from a finance point of view. So car parking is still charged. We still get the income for that parking bay. We are reviewing in terms of how much we're making on those EV chargers now that we have a number of them in operation. And you'll see that that will come through in this year's budget as well, that we'll be inputting that income budget in there so you can see it in the variances. In terms of the rollout, we've got a couple going in, a few projects this year, and the climate change team is constantly looking at our car parks to see where appropriate, as well as any new development is also reviewed for any EV chargers. So it is constantly being reviewed and rolled out.
And can you remind me what happens if a person just simply parks in an EV parking point and is not charging? What happens to that person? Is there a different level of payment or fine for that?
Don't know. I'll ask.
Well, it's great because I can now park in an EV point. Can I leave them not charging? Thank you.
We would ask members of the public, Mr. Chairman, to have a reasonable, self-policing of these things. As you well know, I would increase our enforcement team no end to do a number of things that we would love to do, but certainly we definitely can't afford to do that at present. So I again urge residents to be reasonable at self-policing their behaviour around EV charger use.
That's a reasonable point. The enforcement becomes very difficult, but I guess that in the next 2 or 3 years we'll be able to see a noticeable figure in the revenue stream coming in. I mean that's the point that I'm trying to make, and I just wonder what sort of level, for instance, that might get to next year. Guess, or are we talking tens of figures, or are we talking into three figures?
We're talking tens of thousands. Yes.
It's still pretty small. So okay, right. Thank you. That's the answer to that. Okay, Lauren, I think one final point, and then I think we'll move on.
Thank you. Same page 109, 8.2. I noticed in assets, it was mentioned about the carry forwards due to additional reviews taking place on viability and delays in lease agreements. And I just thought I would like to know whether the agreement for lease on 69 High Street has now been signed, or if that is what this is alluding to, a delay of.
It's not yet signed. So.
If I may just make one final point. It's clear in this year's performance we are doing pretty well, but that's largely because the Treasury has done so well for us. If you strip the Treasury benefit out, then we will be underwater as far as I can see. So this is not something which is sustainable going forward. It's a challenge for the years going ahead. but this year does look, I think, pretty good. Paul, you want to make a comment?
I mean, if you choose to arbitrarily exclude sections of the budget that are positive, then of course things won't look very good. So that would be my only comment, Mr. Chairman. Things are good in the Treasury this year. There'll be other things next year.
Don't misunderstand me. I've already congratulated our Treasury team member, but the point is, I don't think it's something which we can book for the following year and the year after that. And therefore, of course, we have considerable savings to still to find. So, Mark, you want to make a comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully I don't have to explain that the interest rates that we're receiving are high is because interest rates everyone's paying, including us, are very high. And that's a consequence of the inflation, which is even higher and will have a much longer lasting impact. So even as the impact of good interest rates that we're receiving evaporates sooner rather than later, the tail end of the cost of inflation crisis is going to be with us and impacting us for many, many years, much longer than COVID will.
Yes, of course, there is the offset because higher interest rates gives us a Treasury impact, which is beneficial. But of course, higher inflation rates mean that we're paying more for all the services and so on and so forth. So there is a balance.
But interest rates come down. Once prices have gone up, they stay up if there's no deflation.
Yes.
And that's something that we're going to have to cover without the benefit of the higher interest rates for years to come.
And that is exactly the point that I was making. So it's not sustainable going forward in that sense, because going forward, we can't rely on those levels of Treasury input, beneficial Treasury input. So that's the challenge going forward. So it's not a scoring point, it's just an observation that that's the challenge before us all. Okay, fine. Ladies and gentlemen, the recommendation is that we note these reports. We've made some comments on them. We've noted that, and I suspect that members of the executive will have taken on board the comments that we have made. So let us then move forward to item 9. This is the housing revenue account mid-year review. I curtailed some of the discussion in our corporate performance assessment and discussions, but let us have this. And I think, Candice, you're going to introduce this. Thank you.
So I'm not going to go through all the details of the report. I'll just pull out a few highlights. So we start off looking at the outturn position for 22-23 as a reminder, where we had a net underspend of £50,000 on the housing revenue account. And that was predominantly, again, as we saw in the general fund, due to the additional interest receipts that we received on Treasury. We did have some high inflation impacts that we have addressed in the 23-24 budget, because we didn't previously have a provision in the HRA for inflation. And rent income was down, as we did see some impact of voids as well in 22-23. For 23-24, the current forecast is that we're looking to see an underspend of £65,000 on the HRA. One of the areas that's impacting us quite a lot in year, and it's a common theme, is voids. So with the void loss, the increased cost of council tax from those voids and void repairs, it's impacting us by around £300,000. And that has been highlighted of the housing team, and it is something they're now focusing on. We've got establishment savings within the HRA of £90,000, and additional investment income again this year of £300,000. In terms of what we're seeing for next year's budget and what the risks and what we need to look at carefully, it's going to be a call on rent income, really. It's a bit of a balancing act with the HRA. What we highlighted in the strategic review, as well as the budget setting report for 23-24, is our need for additional borrowing, as the business plan is going to get to a point where we cannot afford to pay our current debt repayment schedule, as well as do the maintenance and keep our homes up to decent standard and all the things we would like to do within the business plan. Given where we are with borrowing rates, obviously we'd like to push that as far as possible down the road. And that means that we're going to have to look carefully at the rent income and the amount that we put the rent up by. So we can put rent up by CPI from September plus 1%. So for 24-25, that would be a maximum of 7.7%. What you'll see coming through with all the budget setting documents is a lot of work around that and options and lots of scenario testing that we're currently undertaking on rent income. And then just highlighting capital. So in the current year, we're looking to save around 462,000 on our capital programme. So that's our major repairs. But to flag that the team is looking if there's anything else they can do to speed up some programmes and get that money spent, because obviously for us, that's getting our homes up to a decent standard. It's money we want to spend where possible. And then new delivery, we have got a high amount of carry forwards of around £7 million. That's just due to many delays in contracts and getting those business cases through. And those can be seen in Annexes 2 and 3. And Annex 1 just shows you an updated business plan for the current year. And it includes the budgets as well as the variances. So I'm sure you'll be happy to see that, but happy to take any questions.
Paul, did you want to make an introduction on this?
Sorry, thank you. I was registered to speak on this. Firstly, just to say thank you to the team for producing all of this. The thing I would highlight, and just reflecting on Councillor MacLeod's point, an area where I think the public definitely won't have a great deal of knowledge or understanding is about the level of debt that had to be taken out by the council in reacquiring the stock in the first place. And that obviously hangs over the council and any council in this position in a way that is always problematic for the long term. But the other way that we have issues with this is that obviously the maintenance, repairs and other costs have gone up. We have reduction in the stock overall through right to buy, which just takes things out of the social housing market completely and is a problem for lots of different reasons. But we also have, at this point, the likelihood of some form of cap that may or may not happen. So when we get to the autumn statement every year, we get told whether there'll be a cap or not. So it's very difficult for our officers to actually plan to resolve some of these issues when we may or may not be told that there's an arbitrary cap that bears no relation to the actual pressures that local government face. So for example, if a cap comes in at 5% or 6%, that will mean that we're not able to raise rents to a level that will even pay for the increase in the maintenance costs, let alone deal with any of the additional borrowing that we need to replenish the stock that we've lost through right to buy, or indeed build any more. So, Mr. Chairman, the only reason I registered to speak here really is just to flag once again the issues where officers have to plan sort of 1 year in advance with figures that don't help anybody. And frankly, what they need to be able to do is to be thinking long term about this and to plan so that we have a good, well-maintained social housing stock. Because as you've seen, when you don't maintain social housing in the way that a council would like, you consequently get an increase in complaints on things like housing maintenance. So honestly, Mr. Chairman, the main reason I wanted to speak on this particular item was just to remind ONS that all of these things are intrinsically linked, and there are actually root causes that I would hope ONS would take seriously and address. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Paul. I would just say that I've been around in local government now for 20 years, and this is unchanged, whether it's a Labour government, whether it's a Conservative and Liberal double government, or whether it's a Conservative-only government. Let me have my say, and all I'm saying is that reducing levels from central government and the difficulties that you're outlining have been continuing for as long as I can remember. And I'll recall the discussion that we had in terms of the increase in rents last year. The cap was considerably higher than the figure that we went with in the end. There were all sorts of good reasons, and I supported the particular percentage increase that we went with, but it was lower than the cap that the government was mentioning. I would simply say that. So, but I think you've had your say, and let's leave it at that. Can we get any other comments from members? Anybody want to make a comment or so I've got Zoe and I think Lauren, do you indicate as well? So Zoe.
I've really appreciated the report and really appreciated the benchmarking on the sports centre. Would have loved a bit more benchmarking on this. That would have helped me to add more value. Thank you.
Lauren.
I feel that there's all the more reason to look into the rationale around some of the overspend. We can only work with what's in front of us. And actually, if there is a need to improve the housing stock, then surely it'd be better to be putting the money into that rather than overspending on other things. One other point that I have, which I spoke earlier with Louisa, and I think this is probably the right time to bring it up, is remember we spoke about the use of open market values of affordable stock in the gross development value calculation versus using affordable values. I don't expect you to have that answer right away, but I just wanted that logged because it seems a little bizarre.
Would you like to just,
Sorry.
do you need to speak to us and tell us what your question is rather than refer to a question that you asked earlier today? So what was the question that you want to put?
In reviewing this document, I believe that the council use the open market value of properties for the gross development value rather than using, you can ask if it just doesn't make sense, I'll explain, rather than using the affordable value as the gross development value. Because if these properties are going to be used as affordable stock, then they are not worth the same as open market stock. And I think in doing your appraisals, you're using the open market value instead of affordable value, and almost it's skewing the numbers, and it doesn't appear to be correct. So it's making the GDV, the gross development value of a development, look way higher than it actually should.
That's a fairly technical point, but who wants to make a reply on that? Candice?
Okay, yeah, you're right. We do use the open market value. So on our asset register, when we have social housing stock, we do recognise the social value of it and bring it down. The gross development value based on open market valuation is the standard way that we calculate that gross development value. When we then bring that through into how it impacts the revenue, etc., we do take account of that. But in terms of accounts, it's never going to hit us on the accounts if we've got, so we'll build those properties out for say 10 million, and then we would revalue them down. That's not going to hit our accounts in terms of anywhere on our revenue. But I do take your point about the open market. I've not really thought about it too much before, but I will certainly look into it and look at best practice, etc., and come back to you.
Yes, come back, and I want to make a point as well.
Quick follow-up point. The reason I bring it up is because when we are looking at, for example, spending 11 million to build 20 homes, and we're saying that those 20 homes are going to be worth 12 million, we're kidding ourselves because they're affordable, so they're only going to be worth 8 million. So we're spending 11 million to build something that's worth 8 million, and it seems bizarre.
I think that this is a point. I don't want to go too much further on this. Look, I suggest that we take this offline with Candice and Louisa. Mark, do you want to? I'll allow you to come back with one quick point of reply, if you may.
It's very simply, we're not a private sector for-profit enterprise.
Exactly.
For us, value is more than a financial thing. It's a social thing as well.
I understand that. I think Lauren understands that as well, which is why I want her to take this separately. And I think it's something which we may want to develop. But I understand both sides.
To make just one last point, rather than just laughing at me, is I also have an RP, so I do understand how to value social assets. And as such, you're just overvaluing them. That's my only point.
Okay. No, I'm going to stop that there because we could go on. It's a relatively technical point for most people, but I think it's a serious point, and I think it's worth pursuing that separately and ensuring that we've got a good reply. Either that's a valid point or it's not a valid point when we get to the next round of the housing revenue account and putting together next year's plans. Any other points that anybody else wants to raise? Maybe I could just ask a couple of points on. Page 141, that's Annex 1, which is the spreadsheet on the business plan for this year and next year. In the expenditure, in the cost of operation, the outturn is expected to be 1.981, just short of £2 million. This is considerably higher than the expenditure in the approved budget. And then it goes up again tremendously in the expected forecast outturn for next year. So we're going from an approved budget for this year of 1.5, and we're going to a forecast outturn for next year of 3.2. I just wondered why that was such a significant increase.
So that we're looking at, Annex 1, so it's the 22, but this looks at 22-23 outturn and the 23-24 forecast outturn rather than looking against next year. So just to make that clarification.
Sorry, I should have said it's the cost of operation in the expenditure line that I was looking at as well. Sorry.
That's fine. Oh, that's a good question. I might have to get back to you in terms of what is the breakdown within that to see why we've increased by £1 million on that spend.
It does seem to be a very substantial variance this year, and it stays at a higher level next year as well. So it's rather curious.
Yeah, so in terms of variance of 100,000 this year, that's predominantly due to the council tax for voids that I spoke about. But I will come back to you in terms of why we grew that budget by £1 million.
I also note on page 134 under paragraph 7.4, it talks in the 4th bullet point about the efficiency, the energy efficiency budget is forecast to save 150,000 this year. This is due to the post needed to deliver this programme being vacant. Does that mean, say, if we don't fill that post, then we save lots more money?
We save money, but we also don't deliver energy efficiency. So I guess, you know, in terms of priorities, we would want to spend that energy efficiency budget.
Okay. Another point from me, if I may, on 7.2. I think this was raised earlier in the meeting. That's in 7.2, the second bullet point, which is the increase in void rent loss. It shows that at September 2022, it's £113,000. Is that the expected figure for the year, or is that the year-to-date figure? And I mean, you talk about it being around about a 1% target, and it looks as if it's going to be 1.35 this year. Would you like to comment further on that? And do you see that worsening for next year, given the current position that we're in, economically and nationally?
Yeah, so that is the forecast for the year, the 113,000. So void loss to date is around half of that as of September. We see it at the moment staying around 1.3%, but the housing team is looking at ways that they can bring that void loss down, and they are really highly concentrating on those long-term voids, which is our biggest issue.
Okay, I mean, that's better than it used to be, as I recall. Some voids in the past were considerably higher than that, or in fact, does my memory not serve me rightly?
It's been 1% target for as long as I've been here, and we don't stray too far from it, to be honest. Yeah.
Chair, if I may, I can add the void loss figure used to be higher than 1%. It possibly 4 or 5 years. It's been around the 1% as a target, but prior to that, you're right. I think it was a higher percentage.
It's some time since I've been involved with the housing side of things, and my memory from several years ago was that the void loss was a significant figure, and we were always talking about it being way too high. And this seemed to me to be under control now. So well done. That's a good performance. So very good. Okay, are there any other points that anybody wants to make on that? Okay, so could I say thank you then to the team for that report, very helpful, and thank you, as many others have said, for the report on the general fund as well. So many thanks. So we were asked to note that report, and we've made a series of comments, which I'm sure officers will take account of, and portfolio holders. So thank you. Any other points anybody wants to raise on that before we move on? Okay, then let's move on. We've got 3 items, 2 now on housing, which is on new build housing delivery. We have 3 reports. This wasn't due to come to this particular meeting when the deputy chairman, the vice chairman, and I discussed what would be in this agenda. So these are late additions, but they are fairly important so that we have accommodated them and put them in. So I think, Louisa, over to you if you want to introduce item 10, which is the Elstead and Oxford Ridge delivery. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, I wasn't aware that this was a late item, so apologies. Thank you for considering. So this item, agenda item 10, sets out the position that we are in terms of delivery of further new build affordable housing in Elstead and Oxford Ridge. The papers relating to this item run from page 151 to 232. There's an overarching report which sets out recommendations, including a request for budget approval of 17 million across the 2 schemes to deliver 46 homes in total. The annexes provide supporting information, including business cases and external assessments of our financial appraisals. And there is a summary financial analysis of Annex 2 on page 211. And this just summarises the financial analysis output that Candice and I have worked on together. In terms of specific business cases within this item, there is the site at Springfield in Elstead. It's a regeneration scheme which is included in the neighbourhood plan, which is being considered and heard this week. It will deliver a net gain of 16 homes on a regen scheme, and in addition to delivery of the homes, it will look to provide additional infrastructure in terms of sustainable drainage, which will assist in the flooding that happens in this area, together with additional road infrastructure and a social value contribution as a result of the delivery of the homes. It will deliver an enhanced landscaping scheme as well and help with the biodiversity net gain for the site and surrounding area. The recommendations set out in the report recommend the approval of the budget and the associated delegations in order to deliver the schemes. Financial analysis shows that over the 30 and 60 years, the schemes return a positive impact on the HRA. And I'm open to answering any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Louisa. Now, I don't really want to go into exempt. If we have to, I will delay the item until later, but hopefully we can keep this in open. Yes, okay. We've got Councillor Hyman. Before I bring in Councillor Hyman, any other member of the committee who wants to raise a point firstly? Lauren?
The only point for both of these, Elstead and Oxford Ridge, that I wanted to raise is just to get the per square foot or per square metre build costs. Thank you.
Louisa?
Thank you. Yes, so Candice and I have had a very quick look at this, and in terms of showing the square metre rate for build cost, we have a square metre rate for the overall scheme cost rather than the build cost. So the metre rate for Springfield for the overall cost is 5,212, and just bear with me a second to get a pair of glasses. The overall for site F is 5,434.
Okay. Jerry, you have a question?
Absolutely, Chairman. Well, the first thing is it necessary to go into exempt? Because of page 156, para 4.1 explains that it may be necessary to do so, but the monitoring officers very kindly provided us with a sort of briefing note regarding exemptions. It's obviously not complete because there's a lot more to be discussed in that relationship, but it is made perfectly clear, as it is in some of the same paragraph in things which we're discussing later, that it's about the public interest test, and that members are voting on the public interest test. So it's up to members to decide. Here, it creates a conundrum for officers if of course this committee decides that things should not be an exempt because of the public interest test. The officers need to demonstrate basically that there's a greater public interest in withholding the information than there is in disclosing the information. And there are certain things, people's names, obviously, whatever, that we wouldn't necessarily want to disclose in any circumstances, I would think. But as far as most of the information that's here and in all the other items, I can't see where the public interest is in withholding this information. I mean,
Jerry, you've made your point. This is a point that you frequently make. Could I just ask Susan to rule from an officer perspective as to the degree of exemption that the paperwork here has.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Hyman may have misunderstood my advice about the public interest test. So I understand you've got an open report before you and an exempt appendix, which contains exempt information. I think the first step, Chair, is for you to ascertain, engage from members of the committee, whether they feel that they need to discuss that exempt appendix, the information in the appendix. If they don't, it would be perfectly legitimate for you to remain in open session. If members feel that they would like to discuss that, then you would need to consider going into exempt session and make a resolution to do so. And at that point, in considering that, it's for members to consider the public interest test.
Thank you, Jerry. I think that clarifies that. So members of the committee, are you content for the moment to stay in open session, or does anybody wish to raise issues which are in the exempt papers and therefore will need to go into exempt? So no member of the...
No, the members don't. I certainly would, because it's all about the money. What we should be discussing is the money side of it. But Councillor Atkins has already raised the issue of GDV and issues which I think are in exempt from the in relation to this and the other schemes we're discussing. And in the same, I'm rather disappointed actually that members didn't go along with Councillor Atkins in respect of her comments on the GDV using the open market value rather than affordable value, because that's absolutely vital, and there should be comments made upon that to the executive, I think. So and I would support her in doing so if you wish to take it forward at another time. We similarly have the problem which has come up before over just the 20 odd years that I've been looking at Waverley's documents in detail, that we are not looking at the what we should not be taking
Jerry,
account of the current assets at nil value.
Can I please ask you to stop at that point? You're going over the same ground again.
No, Chairman, I was just saying that the problem that we're doing here is that we are taking account.
Jerry, I'm going to close you down on this. We have discussed this. We have agreed that we're not going into exempt for this. We've dealt with the points that Lauren made in the previous session, and that will be taken offline. But that is not now relevant to this session. So I'm going to call a halt to you there on that. Lauren, do you want to have any?
Chairman, I do have a right under the Constitution to speak to the item, surely. But basically, you've not allowed me to say anything.
Fine. If you'd like to speak to the item and stay in open session, that's fine. Would you like to make your point then?
Yes, absolutely. That we should not be accounting for current assets at nil value. The properties that we've got here, when we're looking at the numbers, we've actually got some millions of pounds of properties there, which everybody knows that's not exempt. We're replacing 10 with 26, isn't it? So we're gaining 16 on this particular site. And we will need to, and we've got that value of properties there already, and that's not taken into account. So what Councillor Atkins was talking about in respect of GDV, it's actually a lot worse than that. And so when I look at this, I think if I was doing this development myself, and any other member who looks at it properly, from a business background, will look at this and they will think there is no way I would do this, because I will end up with something that is worth far less than it will have cost. We simply shouldn't be doing business this way, Chairman, and we really need to look at this seriously, because as Councillor Atkins says, we should not be spending money that we haven't got on the basis of information which isn't complete.
Okay, thank you.
That's enough, thanks.
Thanks very much indeed. Louisa, can you comment on that? Oh. Louisa, not here. Would anybody care to comment on that?
I can comment on that. Yes, I take your comment on board. I'd have to come back to you again, I don't want to just answer here and say perhaps not, exactly what I think. So I'll take that one on board, Councillor Hyman, along with the GDV, and come back to you if that's okay.
Lauren, do you want to further comment on that?
Yeah, I would just say Councillor Hyman makes a fantastic point. And I don't just sit here always bringing this up because I want to be controversial, far from it. It just pains me to see money wasted. And from what I've seen in the short time that I have been in the council, is that build costs appear to escalate here. And I think everyone would agree that. My concern is that by valuing off of open market value, not taking into consideration the current value of the land, the build costs as they are, which seem quite high, but I take your point that that's for the entire build, then the view that we will undoubtedly overspend, we're severely underwater. And is this the best way to be able to provide the much needed social housing, or can we do it in a different way?
That's a judgment call in terms of we will spend more. I understand that point, but that's an emotional point in terms of this. But Candice, do you want to make a further point, or do you want to leave that now and you'll come back to us within how long, do you think?
Yes, so I'll take all the points on board and come back to you. I'm a bit tied up with audit, so I don't want to promise anything, but in the next few weeks, I'll definitely come back with a full response on that, taking your points on board.
Okay, so we've taken that point on board. It's kind of difficult. I mean, we've made some observations on this item. I think in principle where we would perhaps be happy to approve, but we have made some points and items of concern which we would ask to be addressed. Would that be a fair summing up of the meeting? Anybody want to comment on that, or is that is that okay? Okay, so we approve in principle, but we have noted some items of concern which will be taken up, right? Louisa, can you live with that? Oh, sorry.
If I may, I think it's helpful, and I'm sure members of the committee have already reviewed, but as part of the exempt papers that are included, there is an external review that's been completed by Haverley Consulting. So it's not just the figures that have been reviewed by colleagues here. There has been an external review which has been undertaken, which assesses the NPV of the scheme and value for money. So I just wanted to make that point, notwithstanding the fact that you've
I don't think it particularly addresses the point that we're making there.
No, but I think it's, sorry, Chair, I think it's a point that, you know, previously there's been criticisms at the last time we discussed 69 High Street, for example, around reliance on internal officers and questions around the relative expertise of those. So I think whilst we have that in-house, I think as a kind of second backup, we have taken that point on board and it is externally reviewed as well. So we will come back on those points, but I just wanted to make that. Thank you.
I think we'll make the recommendations that in principle we're happy, but we have a couple of points that we've made concerning that. So if you'd like to make a point of that, and we'd like to reply on that. Okay, are we happy, content, Jerome?
I think it's probably a little bit too wide to say that we are happy. I take the points from made about the evaluation and the expectation. I admit it is a judgment call that it will be may well overrun. So possibly I would like to see that there is possibly more put into contingency for this project in order to ensure that if we are voting for the monies to go ahead with it, that there is sufficient leeway to account for rising costs, because as Mark has pointed out earlier, costs are continuing to rise, and I would share your view that we might well find ourselves overrunning on this particular project. However, for a project itself, I would fully support it because we do need that extra housing, even though it may be a loss at the end of the day as far as the council funds are concerned.
So I think that we will agree in principle to the developments, but we express concerns concerning the market valuations. Is that the right way we want to express it, Lauren? The market valuations versus what?
Effectively using the wrong valuation for the end values. So an open market value and not discounted because it's actually affordable. So that there's no discount put in for the fact that it is actually affordable stock. So you're creating an appraisal that looks like it's positive when actually it's a loss. And my point has always been that why not just go and use that money to go and buy a load of homes, because then you're not losing money.
Okay,
doing this, which I agree,
That's
just to lose money.
that's a more general point, if I may say, which I think the correct place for that is a discussion on next year's housing revenue strategy. But in terms of this particular item, we're expressing a concern in terms of the market value process. And we're expressing some concern over cost overruns and perhaps a need for a greater contingency. We're expressing in a view that we are in sympathy, or we are agreeing in principle, but we raise two concerns that we would like to see addressed. Would that fairly represent what we want to say?
Yes, and the point that Councillor Hyman made, that there is no value put in for the current land and the current buildings that are on the land, and there should be.
Okay. We are just coming to a point where we want to pass a resolution. So what we
I just wanted to make it clear, Chairman, that that is an opinion, that is not a statement of fact. And obviously Candice has already said that they do a calculation to value down for the affordable housing. And I would just like to say that there may be some disagreement in the calculation. However, that doesn't make it wrong. So I think a clarification on this point is absolutely correct, but I don't think we should couch this in terms of what is wrong and what is right. We are going to look into it and provide a response.
Thank you. If you hear what I said, we were expressing concern, and I wasn't going stronger than that in terms of building that into the recommendation. I take your point, but I need to reflect the feelings of the committee in terms of coming back here. So I'm going to take a vote on that. We're expressing agreement in principle, but we've expressed two concerns regarding market value options and potential cost overruns. That's the concern that we're addressing. Could I just ask for a vote as to whether we're happy with that as a recommendation? Those four. So can we just count, Jake? Can you count that, please? Sorry, including the chairman and the vice chairman? Just 6-4. Those against? One against? Any abstentions? Okay. Okay. So that's carried. Okay. Thank you. If we then go on to item 11, which is housing delivery on Cadashaw Lane. So Louisa again.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is just an update report relating to an approval already obtained at full council in December last year. The scheme, when considered, was awaiting a planning approval, and the approval for that planning has taken some time to obtain. A new application was required. As a result, the expression of interest originally made some time ago, there has been a request for an uplift in that to reflect the build cost inflation, because it was only an expression of interest rather than a contract. That inflationary uplift is reflective of what has happened in the market, and this report is basically seeking an approval for that budget as well. Thank you.
Comments, questions, ladies and gentlemen? My only comment is it's a 9.7% increase in a year. That seems to me to be a very high increase.
Chair, can I just add that when we expressed the interest, it was before a year ago. So the report reflected in December was the expression of interest made plus some contingency. And since then, the inflation uplift has had the impact of I think it equated to 10.6%.
Yes, it was 10.6%. And we did check that against the build cost inflation figures that the government actually published. So it has been checked and benchmarked to make sure that's an appropriate amount.
You wish to make a point? Jerry, you want to make a point?
Yes, we're on item 11 here. Are we? Cadashaw Lane, Chairman, just to catch up. We did both. We covered Oxford along with Ulster, did we? Well, I would say that would have said the same anyway.
Yes, we did.
Yes, in terms of Cadashaw Lane, I don't have the same problem. But again, as a matter of principle, I really don't think members should be blasé about agreeing something in principle. We have got. I mean, there is a legal test, actually, and it's through Habitats Regulation 5. legally we cannot agree to something in principle without having an assessment of mitigation. It's about obviously environmental harm that can be done by development in.
Sorry, Jerry, are you going back to the previous agenda item now because we finished?
I'm talking about agreeing things in this, and it applies to the previous two, and it actually also applies to the next, because all of them are very, very close to the Weldon Heaths phase one or phase two.
Can you make your point on this agenda item 11, please?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, it's simply about the law in this respect is about doing things openly and honestly and properly. Legally, we can't agree to it in principle without having an appropriate assessment of the ensuring that or demonstrating that the extent to which the mitigation is effective. So I would just suggest that members and obviously the officers are welcome to comment on that, but it is a fact. If you want me to read out what the law says in the conduct of our duties, that we must consider the directive. We're still under its.
Thank you for that point.
Okay, thank you.
So agenda item 11 then, Cadishall Lane. Any other comments, or are we happy to approve? Are we all agreed on that? Agreed. Okay, I think that's unanimous. Thank you. Finally then, Louisa, the new building housing delivery in Whitley, agenda item 12. Do you want to introduce this, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this report sets out an opportunity for the council to acquire 3 further properties on a site in Whitley. The council have acquired 3 homes on the initial phase of the development, and the developer has approached the council to assess its interest in expressing an interest in the acquisition of 3 further homes on this site. And this report seeks the approval for the budget and appropriate recommendations for delegation to acquire the homes and rent them as affordable rented homes. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Lauren?
Sorry. Just to make my point with a little context, in this particular example, if you're paying 818 for those 3 properties and the 1.08 million is open market value, those properties as affordable are actually worth 756k. So you're paying too much. That's the whole reason why that clarity is so important. Thank you.
Comments from Louisa or Candice?
I do understand your point completely. Like I said, I will come back for full reply on that.
Thank you. Any other points that anybody wants to make? Okay. Are we then?
Sorry, Chairman. Yes, I did indicate on this, and I just want to reiterate the fact that with this development, similar to others, the due consideration of planning issues and constraints doesn't appear to have been given. But apart from that, I will obviously defer to the ward member and those who live around Wheeler Street Nurseries in Whitley as to their views on this development. And I fully agree with Councillor Atkins in respect of the financial issues. This one doesn't have quite the same extent of I would consider mad in terms of business sense. Similar to Cadishall Lane, they're not ones which have already got property on that's a value that we're not considering. So I'm perfectly happy, provided that the planning issues are covered properly before any harm's done. Thanks.
Thank you for that observation. Okay, so the planning is a separate process. Louisa?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, planning has been obtained on this site already. So
there's the answer, Jerry. Planning has already been obtained.
Thank you, Chairman. But as in the judgment in June, in the case of Fry, there will be further consent has not legally been given. The final consent hasn't been given unless all the conditions have been discharged. So that's just the way the law works. We
That-
can
that's-
discuss
that-
that out of the chamber.
That's always the situation with conditions have to be observed in any planning agreement.
No, Chairman. It's a matter that's with. I'll forward you a copy of the Fry judgment, and it explains the issue of what's called the catch-all principle, which the council had agreed to accepted in 2007 and in 2018. So,
Jerry, okay, thank you. Right, ladies and gentlemen, are we then content to say yes to this recommendation to go to the executive? All those in favour? Those against? Okay, fine, thank you. So that is approved. Right, now we go, sadly, we have now to go into exempt session to consider the next 3 items. I need to read out that pursuant to Procedure Rule 20 and in accordance with Section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act of 1972, that the committee agrees that 1, that the public be excluded from the meeting during consideration of the following matters on the grounds that it is likely, in view of the nature of the business to be transacted or the nature of the proceedings, that if members of the public were present during the item, there would be disclosure to them of exempt information as defined by Section 1001 of the Act, of the description specified in paragraphs 1 and 3 of the revised Part 1 of Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972, and 2, that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Are we all agreed on that?